It's a pity that Western man chose Freud to be the forefather of psychology instead of Friedrich Nietzsche. You see, what is destroying us right now is a Nietzschean guilty conscience. This is the thing that's stifling our creative soul. You look at Western people and they are shackled by this guilt, this idea that there's some demons that destroyed the world. And for this reason, they cannot create culture. They've reached this sort of like writer's block in the civilizational process. They can't make civilization anymore. And this guilt has shackled them down and holding them down. And of course, if we had Nietzsche there as our coach, our life coach, telling us what to do as a people, we would have been able to overcome this, because that's his whole shtick, isn't it? Do not allow yourself to be crushed by the resentment, slave morality of guilt, and instead learn how to connect with your internal vitality and overcome these problems. But instead of this, what has happened to us? We have got Freud. Freud made us think about our sexuality, obsess about the identity of our willies, how we think about, what's going on below the belt. There's this problem we have with Freudianism, where it brings our consciousness into this direction. And of course, you see an awful lot of the craziness, the madness going on around us is this sort of sexual obsession, this obsession about these type of things. Now, of course, sexuality is important. It's a very significant part of life. In fact, it's a very big contributor towards the creation of life. Yes, it's a big part of our lives, but even Jung got mad at Freud for Freud making it center stage. Jung felt that Freud was selling short the human soul, misunderstanding that what truly lifts us up and motivates us, what truly defines our humanity, is our imagination, our capacity to chase after religious symbolism, for us to go beyond towards things of high purpose. That's the thing that makes us human. And our sexuality is shared with the animals. Of course, we don't want to dismiss it, but it needs to be put in its proper place. And if you look around our culture, you look around this world that we live in today, what do you see? You see porn addicts. You see people with a sex obsession. You see people get guilt for being porn addicts and then want to repent by taking on some religious identity or something like this. You see people creating identities based off their sexuality, which is a really new and modern thing. You see all this stuff, and you don't see a very purpose-driven society reaching towards high horizons, towards the stars. How come when everybody was so sexually repressed in the 50s, we were on our way towards the moon? How come when everybody was so sexually oppressed in the medieval times under these evil Christians that they were building cathedrals? What was going on? What was that all about? How was that working? And so I think to myself, God damn, how much different could things have been if maybe we took Nietzsche more serious, we took Jung more serious when we were creating an understanding of how to interpret our passions and our emotions. Because when I look around, I see the thing that's holding us back from having that imaginative, purpose-filled, futuristic way of thinking that defines Western people so much. I notice that there's a guilty conscience that's holding us back. And this is the type of thing that Nietzsche was attacking head on. You'll know famous ideas from Nietzsche such as herd morality, guilt being designed to hold down the strong. Look at the world, the experience, the historical moment that you just went through in the last couple of years. You were imprisoned in your house, forced to comply because millions of people got spooked. Millions of people felt it would be shameful and they would be guilt-tripped if they did not go along with the crowd around them. They did not follow the herd. Millions of people, despite many rational reasons not to go and not to comply, would follow along because they were afraid that they might be the one to put Granny in danger, or they might be the one who looks weird and doesn't do what everybody else does, even though everybody else is acting insane. The ability of people to resist the herd was a premier capacity and trait that you needed. And of course, this is something Nietzsche is always obsessing about. And when you hear Nietzsche talk about this, he accuses people of slave morality. He says that the organizational unit of mankind is the flock, is the group of sheep. And most people's consciousness and brains are designed like sheep brains. They just go along with everybody else, unthinking. The predator has higher consciousness than the prey animal. The sheep is just some dumbass sitting out there in the field just chewing, going nom, 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 nom. And if you run them and go boo, the sheep will all run together because they have no brain. They operate as a herd, and they have this sort of ethos within them that crushes out any weird sheep. You know, the black sheep shows up, or the sheep, I don't know, that starts to take steroids or something like that. That sheep is is bullied out of the herd because he's different, he's weird. The sheep who stands up and says, maybe we shouldn't run in that direction. Maybe this isn't a good idea. The other sheep turn on him and attack him because the coherency of the herd, all of them being stupid together, is more important than them having one genius. And of course, the predator, the Ubermensch, the man roaming around the edges, this is the individual. He's separate from the herd. He is something else. And the sheep hate him. They despise him in absolute sense. And people hear this stuff, and Reddit hears about this, and they write down all these volumes of articles and Cope and all this, and they say, well, you know what? Nietzsche says these horrible things about the sheep, but to be perfectly honest, being a sheep is fine, and Nietzsche was an incel, so who cares? Nietzsche's an idiot, Nietzsche died being a total massive incel, the biggest incel who's ever lived, actually, when I think about it. The inability for Western man to handle guilt and social pressure made him capitulate and comply with the herd, even though the herd was going in an idiotic direction. And of course, another side of Nietzscheanism is this obsession with biological health, this attempt to pull us out of this abstract blatherbraining that people do, the philosophy cells do so much, and instead get us to obsess about redeeming the body, building a strong culture of the body. And of course, that was the answer to this problem. This crisis that we have was not a great war. What was our crisis? It was a health crisis, of course. It was a crisis of us being able to protect ourselves from some type of evil entity. And of course, all the Nietzscheans, all the truly health-based Nietzscheans were well ready for this. They were educated in biochemistry. They were taking care of their physiques. They were studying all the supplements. They were making sure that they were resistant to these types of things. And all the people around them, these people, these anti-Nietzscheans, the herd that goes to McDonald's, the herd that goes and just stuffs their gullets all day, every day, who doesn't give a fuck about their health ever, compared to us Nietzscheans always taking care of ourselves. These people who got afraid, they all of a sudden were the health experts. They were all of a sudden the people who you had to follow along and listen to. They were all of a sudden the people who stood on the science. Even though we're out here reading the scientific papers, they were the people that you have to follow because they are the herd. Because you're getting sucked into slave and herd morality, the compliance that goes along with it. It doesn't matter how exceptional you are. It doesn't matter how much you actually know this stuff yourself. You're being forced to comply. And the only way that you would have been able to protect your health, and I saw this in real time, the only way you would have been able to protect your health is if you had the strength to be able to resist shame and guilt that was forcing you to comply. And if you had the education to understand how important your health was. These two huge Nietzschean paradigms. If you were obsessed about your dick, if you were thinking about your sexuality too much, you would have fallen for all of those tricks. You would have been on OnlyFans or watching too much porn, and you would have ended up destroying your health, possibly permanently. And that would have been your fault for not listening to the German incel telling you the truth. Now think about what is coming. You are going to be forced to eat the bugs. You're going to be forced to freeze in your house and shiver. You're going to be forced to drive around in a soy mobile, in your little, smart car, city car. Because the mob is going to be guilt-tripped, is going to be shamed into complying with the idea that their expression, their health, their pleasure, their eating of a steak, their warm showers, this is going to destroy Mother Earth. This is going to ransack the rainforest. This is what it is. It's a direct connection between you having some type of convenience and pleasure and energy in your life and the destruction of the world around you. Your expression of your ability to be free, your ability to be healthy, your ability to be strong, to eat the healthiest foods, to roam around free using modern technologies like cars, for you to experience central heating in your home. This is all an expression of murder you're enacting upon the world. And so what you must do is this must be crushed out of you. And instead your health must suffer for the sake of some moral hysteria, some abstract moral thesis. Very interesting. Nietzsche wasn't a big fan of that stuff, was he? He didn't like when people walked around morally pontificating. He had this hunch that there's something going on here. When someone shows up with this moral pontification to make you feel guilty and comply, he's like, I don't know about that. And think about what is still happening. You are being shunted out of the universities, out of the institutions, out of the creative institutions, so society can be reformed in atonement for colonialism or all the grievances of the past and all the terrible things you did in your ancestry, in your past and all this type of stuff. You are not allowed to participate in the creation of culture in the cinema or in music and stuff like this. You're not allowed to participate in universities. You must be kind of shunted out. You can't work in the corporate world and whatnot. This is guilt that is being leveraged upon you to stop you trying to compete in a merit-based system so that the system can be reformed based on moral principles. Of course, Nietzsche was not a fan of that stuff. He did not say, he would look at that and he'd be like, I don't know, this sounds like slave morality to me. This sounds like guilt being shackled upon the creative, the strong, the capable, the great. The excellent are being shackled by the guilt of the weak. And you know what the weirdest thing about all this is? Is that as you can see, all this guilt, all these moral hysterics are designed to make you shoot yourself in the foot, to make life harder for you. It's going to be harder for you to participate in meritocratic systems because they're not going to exist anymore. It's going to be harder for you to pursue your own health because there's going to be more moral policies put in the way to stop you doing this. And this should all be something you go along with and you comply because you should feel guilty about wanting to believe in yourself and wanting to express your soul. Now that sounds like just a big self-own, if you ask me. That sounds like just you making your life harder for very strange reasons. And of course, Western man is going along with this because Western man's mind has been distorted, has been chewed up and turned into jelly by morality, by moral hysteria, by guilt-based moral conceptions. The psychology of Western man right now is a giant way to make his life harder, to stifle his ability to be creative. And so for this reason, Western man is almost out there in the world digging his own grave. He's going out there and he's participating in all these great global moral projects. Sometimes he's even leading them. There's lots of other people involved as well. But he's like a huge creative force. So, you know, our institutions led the response to the crisis. The UN and climate change, this is all our agenda that we're pushing out from the West. This whole idea of equalizing and making society egalitarian. You talk to people from other cultures, you talk to Muslims, for example, and they look at the West and they're like, what are you doing? Have you gone crazy? Where's all this stuff coming from? And why are you trying to push it into our societies? What is happening? So we're the one asserting this stuff. But why is it so self-destructive? And so the reason why this is so fascinating is because the neurosis inside of Western man's mind is a Nietzschean neurosis. It's a struggle with guilt. It is a situation where we have an excellent, great and creative people who lead the world in creative innovation, who lead the world in deciding the projects of the world. America is the world hegemon right now, and their cultural influence spreads all across the world. So it's a very significant position that Western man finds himself in. But the thing is that even though we're so creative and we can lead ourselves towards great projects, we can pursue things like, you know, all the great projects that Elon Musk would be going after, for example. These are examples of things that we pursue, and that whatever culture that we develop, great stories that we develop, we're going to follow along with them. But we have this problem because we're so creative, we're so competent, we're so good at following along in great projects, that if our psychology is wrong, if our psychology has neurosis or damage inside of it, that creative capacity gets directed in the wrong way. It gets spent on something dumb. So we are shackled with guilt. We're having a serious problem with this herd morality, this guilt, this slave morality, rinsing out the insides of our souls. And so all the creative projects that we go after are destroying us. They're self-destructive because the guilt is sneaking in the back door into our creative paths. Now, Nietzsche would talk about this a lot in the context of how our psychology and the moral schema and the narrative and the story and the culture that we build inside of our minds needs to serve life. He's big on this. You know, he's always like affirming life. Life is great. Life affirming. And he was always saying that being in denial of life and attacking life is a bad thing. And he comes up with the schema where he points out that, you know, you can see certain traits, certain habits that kind of show where somebody is attacking life. They're at war with life. And what we're describing inside of Western man is a sort of self-destruction that has this hate for life, because it's based on hating themselves. And life doesn't hate itself. Life is actually built on love. Life is built on self-love, a very high and lofty self-love. Does the lion ever think that he is guilty for wanting to eat, or wanting to make love, or wanting to exist? The lion loves his passions because his passions come out of his soul, and he loves himself, and he wants to put himself into the world and participate in the world and try to win. And this is something that you need to have inside of yourself. Nietzsche would describe that at the core of most master morality, great, excellent people tend to have this very intuitive ability to trust their own souls, trust their own selves, and they're able to bring out creativity out of this. They don't have a guilty conscience about creating children or creating culture or seeing themselves win. They don't have a guilty conscience about that stuff at all because they're aligned, they've got a good, healthy relationship with their passions, and their passions are able to inform them how to live, to carry them along in the world. Now think about that very simple way of understanding man's psychology, and look at our psychology. We shoot ourselves in the foot at every turn, at every corner. We are always ruining ourselves because we don't believe that we should be able to create, because we're evil, because we produced colonialism. Because if we start creating stuff, we'll start hurting people, we'll start making people terrible, and we'll oppress everybody and ruin everybody's lives. And so what we are is, we should feel guilty, and guilt is this toxic emotion that grabs onto us, grabs onto our souls, and distorts our self-image. Instead of seeing ourselves as something that we should feel proud about, that we should believe in the creative capacity inside of us, the divine spark inside of us that allows us to create, instead guilt goes on top of it like a cataract and distorts this and makes us see ourselves as something that is bad. And so the only way that we can express creativity is never about us producing the great cathedrals or producing art that shows us in our glory. Instead, our only justified way for us to express ourselves is by expressing ourselves in this sort of mode of self-sacrifice, of us giving away or working for someone else, because we should feel guilty about wanting to represent ourselves. This is like a lion sort of standing around and saying, do you know what, I feel guilty about eating gazelles, so what I'm going to do is do charity work within the gazelles, and I'm going to starve myself, and I'm going to not participate in the game of life. And this leads to death. It's the same way as you see in many people in the West now talking about stuff like antinatalism. You know, they talk about this idea of, oh, we shouldn't have children because we are evil. If we have children, it will contribute towards destroying Mother Earth. We and our creative capacity, I don't love myself. I feel guilty about what I am. And this guilty conscience, I feel guilty about being alive. Because for me to participate in the world, I have to kill animals to eat them. So I'm evil for that on its first instinct. Like my instincts to eat and participate in the world should be stopped. And the whole rigmarole is a samsara nonsense that I don't want to be a part of. And so there's this psychology of guilt, this psychology of doubt. And you see at the root of Western man this really serious sterilization. Guilt is sterilizing Western man's creative capacity. Now, this is a tragedy. This is not good at all, because Western people are one of the premier innovators and creators in world history. They're not an insignificant people. They're the people who, you know, created modern medicine. They lifted science out of the dark ages and blazed us forward into the modern world. They're incredibly generative of huge varieties of cultural forms and cultural progress. High culture is coming out of Western people. And if they become demoralized, shackled with guilt, to develop this self-hate, they start to distort and destroy themselves, turn themselves back into herd moralists, cut out all the genius traits that they had before. What you're going to see is us sinking down into this dark age, where all of a sudden we'll stop being able to create all these things. Our culture will implode in on itself. The guilt will literally pull us down into death, into a death spiral. And we'll find ourselves in about 300 years walking through the ruins of this culture, almost like the peasants of medieval Europe walking through Rome, looking up at the aqueduct, saying to themselves, what the hell was that? It's like some type of dystopian novel. And so this, to me, seems like the great psychological dilemma that we are tasked with overcoming. Western man has allowed himself to start to despise himself. And now everything that comes out of us is toxic. And this is not easy to overcome. This type of self-hate requires a radical transformation in our self-understanding. We need to learn to affirm ourselves and affirm life and affirm a lot of different things. We need to develop a mindset that is a go-getter mindset, a life-affirming mindset, as we would say, a way of seeing the world that we can fall in love with life again. And that's not easy, man. This is like talking to a depressed person who's got all these traits of self-hate and guilt, and you're kind of thinking to yourself, this person's on the path towards hurting themselves or harming themselves. How do you remoralize that person? It's a hard job to do this. But nonetheless, it comes down to this question: do you have the strength to embrace the tragedy of life and fall in love with it again? This is how you learn to love yourself and believe in the creative power within your soul. You see, life is full of suffering, it is full of pain, it is full of struggle, but that doesn't mean that you have to become only that, because life is also full of people who overcome struggle and pain to do excellent and great things. And the fact that you even exist is a testament to this. Now, this is what I understand when I hear Nietzsche say that the masters need to learn to throw off slave morality, because this is our situation. We are an incredibly excellent and creative people, but we've allowed ourselves to shackle with psychological problems, and we're trapped by our own guilt, and we need to overcome that guilt. We need to be able to get back in touch with creativity again, because so much great stuff comes from us. And this is how we can participate on the world stage in a positive way. You talk to people who see us outside, people who are not from the West. I've spoken to loads of them, and I always chat to them and I ask them, like, what's going on with you, and like, what do you think about us and what's happening there? And they'll always describe these interesting things. It's like, I was talking to an African guy and he said, yeah, bro, like, yous were like the Westerners, you were going to space. We used to see videos of you shooting rockets up into the sky. You used to be traveling to the stars. You were like Superman. And now you're doing all this weird stuff, talking about like your genders and stuff like this. What the hell happened? What are you doing? Like, you used to be so cool, and now you just seem like idiots. What is going on? And this is the outside perception. We're so caught up in all this stuff that we miss the greater part of our spirits. The fact that we're getting dragged down into this lower vibration of consciousness that's resentful, that's guilt-orientated, that's bitter. We miss out on the thing that was truly great about us, the ascendant power inside of us, the part of us that really blazes towards the horizons of world history. That was the way that people saw us. The way that people saw us and were impressed, that they were attracted. They wanted to be a part of that because we are putting our best foot forward and blazing the way into the future. But we're not doing that anymore. You even see someone like Elon Musk struggling to continue that spirit, that Promethean spirit that reaches up towards the sky. He's fighting to try get us to continue on that path, but he can't seem to stimulate it. He finds that all around him, these policies and these corporate entities are seeping in and forcing him to have like diversity hires instead of people who are hired on competence. People are not getting judged as individuals based on their merits. Instead, the neurosis of some people's guilt married to the neurosis of some people's resentment is transforming the entire project into something that is serving some weird low energy thing that's pulling us down into something that is uncreative. And Musk sees this and he panics and he betrays all his Redditors and he says, we're not going to get this space if I'm forced to do this. This is not going to happen. So I'm going to have to go and buy Twitter and create some type of culture bastion so that we can at least assert that these values are wrong, because there will be no outer space in 10 years if the government's forcing me to hire people based on ideology instead of excellence. And that's a big issue. And that's a man brave enough to overcome his guilt, overcome the fear of going against the herd, overcome the fear of not complying, and actually assert himself and stand for something that is excellent, that stands for something that represents our spirit in its highest form. Power to the man. Yeah, this is a little bit different than the way that people slander Nietzsche, the parody that they build up in their minds, that Nietzsche was telling you to dress up as Superman in spandex underpants and go out and beat up grannies and disabled people. No, he wasn't saying that. He believed in greatness. He believed in excellence. He believed in the capacity within you to achieve great things. And he knows that the truly motivating part of your spirit is attached to that greatness. And I know that for sure because I feel it in myself. And I talk to many men. I talk to many people. I know people who wanted to go to work for Elon Musk so bad that they slept in a desert in a tent in order to get the interview sorted out properly. And it's like, who pushes themselves that far in the normie world where everybody's getting haggled with these shackles of egalitarianism and resentment? Who does stuff like that? Nobody's that passionate. Nobody cares. Nobody has that much of a purpose. Everybody's just shackled by debt-based slavery, and they just are going along with the crowd and trying to keep their heads down so they don't trigger anybody and get fired from the job and can't feed for their family. And then you have people like this sacrificing everything, happy to eat dirt as long as they get to participate in something that gives their life meaning because it is excellent, because it has a big horizon. That spirit is what Nietzsche saw, and he saw that excellent feeling is what our souls really are all about. And that's the thing that orders all the rest of our souls. You can't moralize stuff like this. And in fact, most people's morality is coming from this low vibrational state, this state of guilt and resentment, that's actually trying to grab these excellent people, strangle them, and force them to participate in their neurosis so that they don't become creative, so that they become sterilized slaves in their projects. And that's what Western man needs to overcome. And if he can achieve this, we again will have a great future. We will overcome this guilt and affirm our creative soul, and we will again be able to dream big. But if we fail, this guilt will weaken us until we fall to our knees with our heads heavy in our hands, weeping as we are transformed into a slave.